Welcome to Norse Code, the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I am your host and producer. My name is James Pagoshnik. Thank you so much for listening. On the other end of the tin can and string, I'd like to introduce our co-host, our analyst. He is the editor-in-chief of Vikings Territory. He writes for several different blogs on the interwebs, and was the original writer of the song No Diggity that's performed by Blackstreet. Please give it up for Arif Hassan. Hey, Arif, how's it going?
You know your way at work, kid.
I didn't say the singer. I just said the lyricist.
That's fine. I wrote those lyrics, too.
Now, were you part of the No Diggity part, or were you a part of the No Doubt?
I had my fingers sort of everywhere in that song. It's not like songs these days with 20 writers.
Nope, this was purely a Dr. Dre and a Reef joint. That's what it was. Or were you responsible for the female rapper part that everyone who listens to the song is like, wait, this is in here too? I don't remember this at all.
Don't recall that, actually. So I guess you have a point. I'm probably not responsible for that.
You're not responsible? Okay. So at least we don't have to call the Hague and say that we got you. I feel better about the future of the podcast now that you don't have to be prosecuted for war crimes. Awesome.
That's good news. We still have to worry about Dusty. Dusty's laptop being prosecuted for war crimes. But that's another episode.
That is another episode. Dusty O'Connell is once again on assignment. He's on assignment at work, but he's on assignment. And we would just like to thank you again for listening and for donating and helping keep this an ad-free podcast. We don't need to be sitting here and shilling brain pills or monthly nutrition samples or underwear or anything. We prefer to keep this on content. And I realize I'm saying this as we were talking about the song No Diggity, but still, we're trying to keep this as ad-free as possible. So, once again, thank you guys for donating. For those in the future who would like to donate, you can donate $5 at NorseCodePodcast.com, and the link is at the bottom of the page. You should move it up to the top and have it nice and blinking, almost like a 90s GeoCities page.
I was just thinking that with the crawling ants around it.
Crawling ants, maybe a big under construction thing, maybe
little workman gift.
Bill Gates turning into the devil too. It'll be great.
It will have an autoplay.midi. You have to download Real Player to access the website.
Who's our host? I feel like we should just move it over to Angelfire or something. Angelfire is apparently still a thing.
Yeah, you can. Well, now I think is Angelfire owned by the same people who do Mediafire? Because they do a lot of great illegal content hosting.
No, I don't believe it. I don't believe it is. But you can still get a website at Angelfire. God damn it! I was trying to go ad-free, and here I am shilling for Angelfire.
Well, we're just you're not shilling. We're just reminiscing and surprised.
Angelfire is not paying for any of this, but apparently you can get your own domain for $12.
You have the budget to pay for it. Yes.
So I went to the website, and it says angelfire.lycos.com. So apparently...
Lycos still exists. That's news.
We're uncovering all sorts of things about the old internet.
Wow, Homestead still exists. I made my very first webpage with Homestead.
I was a GeoCities kid in the mid '90s. Apparently, Hotbot still exists. And
there's no way Hotbot still exists.
Hotbot exists, and so does Ask.com.
So when I type in the Hotbot into my Google Chrome Unibar or whatever they want me to call it, the search suggestions are Hotbot Wiki, which maybe I don't know, Hot Bottoms Beachwear, Hotbot 3D printer, Hotbot movie, which sounds phenomenal, and Hotbots with a Z at the end.
I don't know what's wrong with you, because when I typed in hotbot.com, it actually loaded it up, Hotbot.
Well, I didn't. Well, when I type in hotbot.com, it loads it up. I'm just saying, when I type in hotbot, it finds the 5 most searched terms related to that, and Hot Bottoms Beachwear is number 2. oh, this website actually looks a lot different, and there's a weather zombie thing. Search for weather. Oh. That's... You just type in weather and then area for Google. That's... Well, I mean, that's not bad, I guess. So does it still search like 5 different search engines and...
Doesn't look like it. So good for them. They're diversifying by...
Hotbot the word Google.
Yes.
I'm
looking up Google on my Bing toolbar. It'd be great.
They only display 10 results per page, and I can't change that. What is this?
So, we've stalled long enough because we have draft news. The draft actually happened.
News.
No more mocks! Yes!
2 weeks late for us to...
No more mocks! Yeah, well, I can still be happy that we're not going to see mock drafts until, like, November.
You don't follow the same Twitter I do, because I've seen a number of 2016 mock drafts.
I've seen one in which Todd McShay is saying we're going to be picking up... Was it for offense or defense? I can't remember. I think it was offense.
I think the one in the Daily Norseman said an offensive tackle. I don't know which offensive tackle because I didn't click on the story, but my guess would be Ronnie Stanley, because I've been told that he is very good.
Yes. We're actually not going to cover this year's draft. We're only going to cover next year's mock draft.
Actually, that sounds like a fantastic podcast idea. Why didn't we...
Why didn't we discuss this in the pre-show?
Yeah. Come on.
We're only going to cover the 2016 draft. Fuck you people and wanting to hear about Trey Waynes.
Well,
oh, no.
I don't know, people have... It is Ronnie Stanley, by the way. Called it. Yeah, I don't know. People sort of had their fill of the 2015 draft, right? It's been a week, so we've had time to absorb all of the information and news, so...
Everything's already written.
No reason to really talk about it. I'm going to Google 2016 mock drafts, and then while we're talking about the 2015 draft, I can just pepper in some information about the 2016 draft. Oh, wow, there's a lot of 2016 mocks out here. Hold on.
That's disturbing.
Oh, there's an NBA 2016 mock draft. Has the 2015 NBA draft happened yet?
No, 2015 draft for the NBA happens right after the finals. That's in June.
That makes sense. Why would I ask if that happened yet? Because 2016, that doesn't make any sense. The season's not over.
No.
All right. Wow, there's a lot. Wow, there's so many here.
Do any of them involve us trading our picks to Cleveland?
We do have to make up for lost time.
Yeah.
Let's see. Oh, wow. The Big Ten takes 3 of the top spots in ESPN's 2016 mock draft. Go Big Ten. That's cool.
And none of them Gophers.
Yeah, probably not.
No. Well, should we talk about Trey Waynes? I feel like the people want to hear about Trey Waynes.
It might, but I'm going to look over these 2016 mock drafts. Why don't you preview Trey Waynes and just talk about him for a second? I'll look over these 2016 drafts.
We did not trade out of the first round. We did not trade with Cleveland. We did not find a way to trade with Seattle, who did not have a pick in the first round. We decided to pick. And we picked up a corner. And we picked up Trey Waynes, the cornerback out of Michigan State, with our 11th pick, who is a speedy gentleman.
Okay, no, I was actually just looking over the 2016 draft. Turns out, where we pick in the draft, wildly inconsistent. Who we pick, also wildly inconsistent. We could pick up Ezekiel Elliott, we could pick up Tyler Boyd, we could pick up Laquan Treadwell, and that's only 3 mock drafts to look at. There's also a Ronnie Stanley one. So those are your watch list people, if that's, what you're into.
A thing.
Otherwise, we could talk about, Trey Waynes, I guess.
As far as his injury history, he did suffer a broken fibula and torn ligaments in his knee back when he was a senior in high school.
That's not really an injury history, then.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. So, that's our analysis of Trey Waynes.
He's a short corner.
He's not short. He's just light.
He's not Josh Robinson short.
No, in fact, he's 6 feet tall, which is one of the reasons the Vikings drafted him. Okay, I'll talk about Trey Waynes. So, the deal with Trey Waynes, so he is purported to be the top corner in the draft. He actually had a very, very good season in Michigan State. And part of that comes from his speed. He ran a 4.3 140 at the NFL Combine. A lot of people know about that. I think he probably ran faster if you take a look at it in the frame by frame, but no one really cares about that. So instead, you could take a look at sort of his field speed. His field speed's pretty good. He didn't get to test it a lot except against Oregon because he lined up against players like Kenny Bell. He lined up against like Penn State's like 4.65 wide receivers. But he didn't actually line up all that much against Devin Smith when they played Ohio State, so you didn't actually get to see a lot of his speed, but he did stay in stride for stride, especially on 9 routes, for a lot of these receivers, even sort of the faster ones at Oregon. So for all of his good play at Michigan State comes a lot of measurable talent. So he's a little over 6 feet tall, which is nice. He's purported to have long arms. They measured out to be 31 or 31 and a quarter, which is not, huge or very long. In fact, I would not call them long. When I did research on arm length, I found that arm length does not tend to have a linear effect on cornerback play, which is to say, the longer arms you have, it is not necessarily true that the better that you do when you control sort of for other variables. And I think listeners sort of versed in statistics should perk up when I say that, because that means I'm reducing sample size, functionally reducing sample size. So it could be true that it has a linear effect, but I've not found one. But instead there is a substantial effect at 32 inches, which is sort of when cornerback play improves markedly. So when I construct sort of these workout or combine filters to create positional scores, cornerbacks with 32-inch arms, which I believe Xavier Rhodes has. I'll look that up while we're talking. They basically have a bonus. I did notice that there was a relationship between 40-yard dash time and arm length, which is to say you can make up for a slow 40 with with longer arms, and that relationship is linear, but only when you sort of combine the two. And I think that actually makes a lot of sense because you don't have to have recovery speed in the same way if you've got length and sometimes leaping ability, but mostly length to make up for it. By the way, Xavier Rhodes' arms are 33.75 inches, so they're very long. I think more important than arm length, and a lot of people talk about how Seattle looks for arm length in their cornerbacks. Not quite true. They look at wingspan, and if you take a look at Trey Waynes' wingspan, I think that relative to the rest of the class this year, not in general, I think in general it's a decent wingspan. But if you take a look at it relevant to the rest of the class this year, I wouldn't say that that measurement pops out. And that tends to be a little bit more predictive, at least in small sample testing. I haven't been able to get enough information about wingspan for cornerbacks going back going all the way back to 2005 to fully test the data. But he has a 75-inch wingspan. Compare that to Marcus Peters, whose arms are only half an inch longer, but he has a 79-inch wingspan. And you can see why people would say that Marcus Peters plays with a lot of length, even though his arms are not what I would call long. Because, again, 32 inches is sort of the cutoff for me to call arm length long. I would say that wingspans above, probably above 76.5 inches, to me, that's sort of a long wingspan. And Trey Waynes doesn't have that. He has 75-inch wingspan. His hands are small, too. So from a measurable standpoint, I think that his initial look is fine, right? He ran a fast 40. He has a really good 10-yard split, and he's a shade over 6 feet tall. That's fine, but I think sort of the deeper you dig into his measurables, the more those measurables are a little bit of a concern, even though they weren't a concern with Michigan State. And to that extent, I could talk a little bit about the Michigan State scheme. But first I want to talk about sort of what pops out about his measurables that I don't like. The first, I think, is his weight. Sort of taken a couple of pot shots at that. When Mike Zimmer said that 185, 186 is average for a cornerback, that surprised me in a lot of ways. Because if you take a look at all the cornerbacks that have gone through the combine process since 1999, that is in the 43rd percentile, so it's below average. And to me, it's an even bigger concern because those that are at about 186 pounds, they tend to be shorter. And so from a density perspective, which I think is important, right, because it's very difficult to move someone who's 186 pounds but like 5'8" versus someone who's 186 pounds and 6'2". They're just an easier person to move. But from a density perspective, that's really worrisome to me. The next cornerback that's 6 foot tall, if you take a look at some of these big boards, the next cornerback that's around the same height, within like a half an inch, maybe less than half, around the same height as Trey Waynes and between 185, 187 pounds or lighter even, you have to go all the way down to like the 18th ranked, 19th ranked cornerback to find one. It's actually very difficult. Kevin Johnson and Trey Waynes have similar height weight concerns, although Johnson is just a slightly more compactly built. And he's a shorter wingspan, so from a measurable perspective, he's not great either. But if you take a look at the rest of this cornerback draft, everyone who is as light or lighter than Trey Waynes is significantly shorter. And so from a density perspective, I think actually Waynes has some significant issues, and I've found that has a big impact on cornerback play, and intuitively that makes a lot of sense, right? Because if you're playing press, and you don't have to necessarily jam receivers when you're playing press. I think those two terms are those two concepts are used synonymously when that's not necessarily the case. But when you're playing press, receivers have a chance to be a bit more physical with you, and you can play basically from behind because of it. Because when they're more physical with you, they can throw you out of the way or put you off balance. And when they put you off balance, you have to take another step to rebalance yourself, and that puts you obviously a step behind. And since when you're playing in press coverage, you tend to be a step behind anyway, you're now 2 steps behind, which I think is pretty fatal in the NFL. So that's my big concern with his with one of his measurables. The other thing I have a concern with is his short area quickness. He did have a better pro day in regards to his short area quickness than his combine. I think he ran like a 4.19 short shuttle at his pro day, and I think it's like a 7.09 three cone at the combine. Either way, both of those numbers are not good. In fact, they're slightly worse than average for someone of his height, and they're a little worse than that for someone of his height weight combination. And I think that sort of the lighter cornerback that you are, not only do you have to be faster, which again Waynes is, but you have to be quicker because the way that you win is not with physicality, it's with timing, anticipation, and footwork. And a big part of that footwork is quickness. If you don't have hip fluidity, you're sort of out of it, which is why I think Jason Verrett was sort of the best cornerback last year. And in fact, he's actually playing very well in San Diego, but San Diego doesn't have a market, so no one really covers that. And, you know, a lot of people, when I talk about this, they talk about Xavier Rhodes. And I think it actually makes a lot of sense to say, hey, Xavier Rhodes had one of the worst short shuttles I've ever seen a cornerback take. And I think that's fine. He ran like a 4.65, and I think that's a fine objection to have when I make this objection about Trey Waynes. But I have 2 comments about that. The first is that Xavier Rhodes is like 210 pounds. He's massive compared to Waynes. He weighs like 25 more pounds, and he's a little bit taller. He's more dense, and that's really important. When you run these athleticism scores, Xavier Rhodes, despite the short area quickness being sort of a big flaw of his, he makes up for it in a lot of ways, and Waynes does not. And there's a huge difference there. And so when I come up with a generalized positional score, which again is not, weighted towards a type of cornerback or the system fit that cornerback can have, which is important. You need to do that. But when you look at generalized position scores, Xavier Rhodes scored like an 8.2 or something along those lines. I don't have the number in front of me, but he scored above an 8. Right, which any number above an 8, I think, is good from a workout perspective and is reason to bump up a corner if they're not your top corner. And any number below a 4 is a reason to sort of knock them down. And that's not equal, right? Because it's a 0 to 10 system, which means any number below, there's obviously 4 numbers 4 and below, and only 2 numbers 8 and above. But still, that's what it looks like has happened. If you have below a 4, there's a very low chance of success. If you have above an 8, there's a very high chance of success. That's just how it's worked out, even though it's not equal. I would say that Waynes, who scored a 6.1 when you use his pro day scores, I would say that Waynes is not measurably interesting in any way. And if that's part of the reason for the pick, which it very clearly was, it was a very significant part of the reason for the pick, if you listen to the language of the Minnesota Vikings and the way they talk about him, then I think that you have a big problem. If it's sort of like a Marcus Peters thing where now he's just too damn good that you don't have to pay attention to his measurables, then that's different. And I have concerns from a film perspective instead. But from a measurables perspective, I think Waynes it comes out to basically average because he has a bunch of fatal flaws that he doesn't fix. And he has a bunch of good qualities about him that in this draft class are not as unique as people like to think. And that's actually also one of the problems I had with the pick, is that if Trey Waynes was the only cornerback, let's say it was a draft class from a while ago, the draft class after Patrick Peterson came out, I think was not necessarily very good, if I remember correctly. But in some draft classes, I could see Waynes being a very clear-cut number 1, but to me, he was not better than Kevin Johnson, who, again, has measurables concerns, Marcus Peters, who has some measurables concerns, but not as much as people like to think, despite his slow 40, and Byron Jones, who has a phenomenal sort of measurable package. 76.5-inch wingspan. Like I said, that's sort of the cutoff for having a long wingspan. 32-inch arms. He ran a 4.39 at his pro day. Broke records at the broad jump. Broke the world record at the broad jump. Broke the combine or tied the combine record at the vertical. Although I guess someone had a higher standing vertical at a regional combine. And Byron Jones is 199 pounds and he's slightly taller. From a measurable perspective, I think Byron Jones is better, and he showed a lot of great instincts on the field. He just has some injury concerns. I think that if the part of the reason that you picked Trey Waynes is because he ran faster, I think you're only missing some of what you need at the cornerback position from an athletic perspective, and I don't think he changes direction very well. And that's the second reason I think the Xavier Rhodes comparison doesn't necessarily work, because even though Xavier Rhodes has a better positional combine score, he makes up for it in a lot of ways, including his length, which is very important, his vertical ability, which is enormous. He had a 40.5-inch vertical leap at the combine, which is not something Trey Waynes was able to do. And he did it at, again, 210 pounds, which is a really significant part of the package. It's difficult to stress. He also moved better on the field at Florida State. If you take a look at sort of the Wake Forest game that he put together, you could take a look at Draft Breakdown, and there's a bunch of them. When I was reminded that Trey Waynes had a better short shuttle than Xavier Rhodes, I was like, well, that's fair. And so I took a look at the Xavier Rhodes film at Florida State, and it's significantly better at that particular concern, at short area quickness, than Trey Waynes was. He was able to it's Florida State's pro-style defense. I shouldn't say pro-style, but it's a much more universal style of defense. The tape I broke down was the Wake Forest tape. There's a couple of other ones where he was able to cover in-breaking receivers a lot better. He's able to change direction a lot better. And his grabbiness, a flaw they both had coming out, his grabbiness was not nearly as bad as Trey Waynes's, because Waynes did it significantly more often at Michigan State, for one. And for two, Xavier Rhodes' grabbiness seemed to be a result of just being competitive. He just wanted to get in your face and just be a cornerback. Whereas for Waynes, his grabbiness seems to be less about that and more about recovering from not being able to catch up, which that's subjective. And if you think I'm predisposed to dislike Waynes, I think that is something that you can dismiss or look up for yourself and see if you agree. But for the most part, that's my interpretation of it.
I think it's kind of safe to say that your reaction to the pick was you were underwhelmed by the selection of Waynes.
I think so. I think that's a fair response to it. And I've only talked about sort of the measurables and a little bit of the film. One of the other things that I have a concern about is that though he played extremely well for Michigan State, I think that his fit for the Vikings is problematic. And I think that his fit for other systems is much better. I've talked about this at length. I don't know if sort of the podcast listeners have, watched or read, so I shouldn't say watched, read my work on Trey Waynes, but the scheme that Michigan State played in was very important. They ran a cover 4 quarter system where he only had to cover deep shots in a quarter of the field, and he didn't even have to cover the post route. That was up to the safety. So he really, his biggest job was to cover corner routes, which he was not great at, and 9 routes or vertical routes, which he was phenomenal at. And then he didn't have very much to do with sort of the underneath routes. He had virtually nothing to do with in-breaking routes. That was up to the linebackers and the safeties. And so because of that, it is a little bit difficult to evaluate him. But the second thing is that when he does have, because Michigan State doesn't call the same play every play, but when he does have some responsibility with a person breaking inside, he does an exceedingly poor job. And so from a film perspective, I have a lot of issues with him because of that. And so I think it was not a good pick. I think that he's a good pick in the second round because he did play very well. He's very smart. He's relatively instinctive. And he's very coachable and got great character. All of those things that the Vikings promoted are true for the most part. But I think those are qualities that you'd find in the second round of the draft. I think, for example, Ronald Darby is coachable. He has some character concerns, but they're not as much as sort of his teammate at Florida State. And he's athletically pretty outstanding as well. And he's was a second-round pick, clearly in my mind, as a talent. And it sounds like some teams that run well, I don't know what Pittsburgh does now that that Dick LeBeau is gone, but Pittsburgh's old scheme was very favorable, I think, to Trey Waynes' style of play, and it sounded like Pittsburgh wanted to trade up for him. And if that's the case, that makes a lot of sense to me. Seattle doesn't invest high picks in cornerbacks. Otherwise, I think that he would be a perfect target for them because his style of play, plus his schematic tendencies were very similar. I think that they probably wouldn't have him on the board because of his 31-inch instead of 32-inch arms, and his wingspan's not amazing. But the way that he plays and what he's used to is very close to Seattle's. I think Atlanta would have been a great fit for him. There's a bunch of other teams in the league I think he's a great fit for. I think for the Vikings, he's not. A lot of people say, hey, Mike Zimmer knows his scheme better than you do, which is true, he does. But I know enough about the Vikings scheme. I like to think that a lot of the traits that he had issue with, I think, are going to be magnified in the NFL. Zimmer thinks those things are coachable, and I do not. And Zimmer's obviously a better coach than I am. But, I mean, I just happen to disagree. I think that these traits are fatal flaws, and coaches have been wrong before, and writers have been wrong before. And I think that I am right this time, and the coach is wrong, and we'll see.
Why can't you just accept on blind faith that everything is going to be fine? And what gives you the right to sit and complain about these picks? It's not like you're paid to analyze or anything.
Right, like it's like I can't have opinions once the Vikings have an opinion. This happens all the time. Where's it?
Draft day tweets are the best.
Yeah.
Just the best.
But yeah, and so I think there are significant problems, and they drafted him. The way they talk about him, they talk more about his potential than his technique or his polish. And they talk about how they have to polish up his technique and have to work on his footwork here and all that. And I think that's to cover up some of the agility concerns that you might have with him. And they don't think he's a polished cornerback. I mean, you go through the transcripts, you talk to Mike Zimmer. They don't think he's a polished cornerback. They're talking about his athletic package, and I think that some of his athletic skills don't translate to the scheme, and they do. In the way that he coaches defensive backs, the way that they're supposed to flip their hips, the way that they move, makes it easier for cornerbacks who don't have a lot of agility to basically, I don't want to say feign agility, but to cover up for that in ways. And so the way that he coaches up footwork, there are some things that he does, like having DBs turn their back to both the receiver and the quarterback at times in order to move faster based on how they anticipate the route's going to go. Those things can make up for it, but I don't think that they will make up for it enough in Minnesota. One thing I would stress is that I would wait to judge Trey Waynes if he has problems year one, or if he succeeds year one. But if he has problems year one, I would still wait, right? Xavier Rhodes wasn't very good year one. And he wasn't bad. He wasn't very good year one. And so I would wait, a year or two to judge him, especially because it sounds like they think he needs to polish up his technique. But I do think that there are, issues, and I think that they'll show up in year one. And if I'm right, we'll find out in year 3, unfortunately. But But yes, that's sort of, I think, the nature of the pick. I thought he was an extremely good cornerback for Michigan State, but I think the things that he was good at are not the things he will necessarily be asked to do in Minnesota. And, people talk all the time about how Zimmer's the kind of coach that adapts the scheme to his players, which to some extent is true. But the radical nature of how you would have to adapt the scheme to account for Trey Waynes' strengths and weaknesses would disrupt the rest of the scheme. And you can't just do that for one player. You have to do it in a cohesive package, or you're screwed. And that's why Bill Belichick doesn't just draft players who are good at one thing constantly, right? Like sometimes he has to draft players that are the second best at another thing that his defense has to do, because you can't just take 11 players with a very disparate and one-dimensional skill set and then just say, well, I'm going to design a scheme that makes them all good. Like, you can't do that. They have to be cohesive and work, and, strengths of one player have to cover up for weaknesses of another player. And so that's my issue with the pick. I thought it wasn't a very good value pick. I thought there were other better picks in the first round. People keep on asking me what I would have wanted the Vikings to do, and I would say trade down. The Vikings said they had 3 trade partners. They constantly do have trade partners. They advertised the pick. I heard about people wanting to trade up into the Viking spot. I think they had a lot of trade partners. So trade down, grab another pick, and draft Byron Jones. I think that's the solution. Then you get Eric Hendricks in the second round. With your other pick, you might be able to get maybe a better offensive tackle. You could target Jalen Strong, who I guess on the Daily Norseman, CC Norseman reported a Darren Wolfson tweet basically that said the Vikings were targeting Jalen Strong. I have heard that they were targeting Stephon Anthony. Who knows? You could target your other target, right, with your other pick. Either way, I think that's better for the Vikings.
There was some talk about how Captain Munnerlyn didn't work out exactly as they had planned last year, and as a result, they were looking at another corner for this year. Do you think there's any truth to that, or if this ends up lighting a fire under Munnerlyn?
I think that it might light a fire under Munnerlyn, but I think for the most part, it probably will. I think the issues with Munnerlyn were that it was never that he wasn't physically able to do his job, ever, right? He was shorter, fine. But he was never unable to do his job. It was more that he was confused about what he had to do. Like, all of the big plays that Munnerlyn gave up looked like confusion and blown coverages and less, I'm bad at my job, right? So for example, when Josh Robinson was lit up by the Bears, and pretty much only by the Bears, it was an issue of his physical capabilities, right? But with Munnerlyn, it never seemed like that was an issue. And so, I think he just had to learn what he needed to do. And I think that it was kind of stunning that you saw these mistakes late in the year, even though he theoretically should have known. And I think that's not necessarily a good sign, but I think maybe another year or whatever under the scheme, he could fix it. For the most part, I think that they envisioned Munnerlyn as a slot-only corner, and they didn't have the outside corner they wanted. And so he played outside. I thought it would have been better if Josh Robinson was the starter outside and Captain Munnerlyn only came in during slot situations. But what happened, and I think that the Trey Waynes pick only follows through on a plan they already had for Munnerlyn, which was to play him in the slot. And it really depends, because Mike Zimmer doesn't really want to play in the nickel package too much. He wants 3-down linebackers, but the Vikings still don't have 3-down linebackers, and so I think you'll see a lot of Trey Waynes, or you see a lot of Trey Waynes on the outside and Captain Munnerlyn on the inside. If Waynes wins the job, there's every possibility that he doesn't. Drake Kirkpatrick didn't win the job in Cincinnati right away, and so it's possible that a first-round pick doesn't win the job. It's well within Mike Zimmer's sort of history not to just automatically give those jobs out. But yeah, it could light a fire under Munnerlyn, but it's less motivation and physical capability and more learning the scheme, which he might have. But evidently it took him a while. I talked to a bunch of Panthers fans. It evidently took him a while to pick up his schematic responsibilities with the Panthers, and then he turned into a very, very good nickel cornerback. So who knows?
Speaking of linebackers, Eric Kendricks was our second pick. He was picked 13th out of the second round, linebacker out of UCLA. And you seemed like you seem to approve of this one.
Yeah, I think I'm more happy about the Kendricks pick than I am disappointed in the Trey Waynes pick, if that makes sense.
It evened out, but Kendricks is definitely a good pickup for middle of the second round.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that if you told me that the Vikings were getting both Trey Waynes and Eric Kendricks, I'd be net happy. So that's fine. I think that Eric, and in fact, I would have envisioned the way for that to happen is that you trade down in the first and then trade up into the first. But you could just get him in the second round. Fantastic. He is the most instinctive linebacker in the draft. I said it before. Rick Spielman said it the night of the draft. Mike Zimmer, I think, said it at minicamp. It's something that we in the Vikings absolutely agree on. He has phenomenal instincts. He can get to the ball carrier really quickly. If you take a look at some Anthony Barr film from 2013, he and Anthony Barr have some pretty phenomenal chemistry, which might be fun to see. If I can find that GIF of Anthony Barr and Eric Kendricks doing both what they do best in order to assist on a tackle, I'll put it up on the show notes. It's one of the best GIFs of linebacker play I've ever seen. It's from UCLA. It's fantastic. But I think when you talk about sort of what Kendricks' responsibilities are, he sounds a lot like a middle linebacker, and that makes sense. He's very smart. He knows the scheme really well. He made all of the defensive calls for UCLA. He lined up everybody at UCLA. He did all the audibles on that defense, and he's an astoundingly high character. He's very intelligent, et cetera, et cetera. And he translates that onto really quick sort of football instincts. Like, this is the distinction I think a lot of people were not happy with Christian Ponder, right? Because a lot of people knew Christian Ponder was smart, and then when you called Teddy Bridgewater smart, people would be like, well, Christian Ponder was smart, and that didn't help him, which was stupid. Christian Ponder's issue was that he was not translating his intelligence about football onto the field in terms of quick decision-making. Eric Kendricks and Teddy Bridgewater both do that, in that it's not just evident that they are smart when they study tape. It's evident that they process that information extremely quickly and then translate that into play. And a lot of people talk about how Eric Kendricks doesn't get a lot of tackles for loss, which is not actually true. He had like a lot at UCLA this last year. But what's interesting is that if you take a look at markers for linebacker play, I took a look at some metrics to see sort of if there is a relationship, and I went back to 2005 again to see if that relationship existed. And the best tools for it are not total tackles or total tackles for loss, but total share of tackles and total share of tackles for loss on the team. So what percentage of your team's tackles for loss did you get? And Eric Kendricks' shares for both were okay. They were neither red flag or green light, basically, if you wanted to categorize it that way, until his senior year, which notably, it's the year without Anthony Barr, where they shot up to astounding levels. And they were both very, very green light, basically. So for an off-ball linebacker, you want a tackle for loss share that's above 13%, and his was at like 15.8 or 16%, which is pretty astounding. For an on-ball linebacker like Anthony Barr was at UCLA, or say Vic Beasley this last year, the tackle for loss share that you want when you convert them to a 4-3 linebacker would be somewhere around 20, and Anthony Barr's was like 23. So both of them had pretty astounding tackle for loss shares in their final seasons at UCLA. And even though you take a look at some of these advanced metrics and are not super happy with Eric Kendricks, I think that he is an astounding linebacker that is one of the best coverage linebackers in the draft, if not the best. And his speed at 4.61, I think, shows up on field. He's very fluid hips. He reads plays very well. He doesn't get fooled by play action very easily. All of that, I think, is pretty astounding. I think that he's a better will linebacker than a middle linebacker. Sounds like the Vikings want him at middle linebacker this year. I think that's to keep Chad on the field at will linebacker. But I think that he's a better weak side linebacker than medium linebacker for a couple of reasons. The first, I think, is that his biggest weakness is his size. I don't think he can increase his size that much. He's 232, or he weighed 232 at the combine. I think he's going to be 235 with the Vikings. And I don't think that's a huge problem. I think people are like stuck in this idea of 250-pound linebackers, and they don't realize that the vast majority of off-ball linebackers in the NFL weigh less than that. And
they don't have to be at that size. They can be much smaller, and for good reason.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, speed matters a lot more than size at the linebacker position, it turns out. Unless you're playing in 1980, in which case...
in which case, yeah, that would be a hell of a lot different. Yeah. If people were built a little differently. You didn't have 400-pound linemen.
Right, exactly. And the majority of the defenses that were successful back in like 1980 were like very, very traditional 3-4 defenses, and so they didn't block the guards very often, and so the guards got a free shot at the linebackers. You wanted your linebackers to be bigger, but yeah. So all of those things are true about Kendricks in terms of his weaknesses. But I would say he's very strong for his size. A lot of people think that he's not because he didn't do a great job getting off of blocks. Those all seem to be technique related to me. I think that his footwork wasn't set when he took on blocks. I think that he hits his pads too high. And I think that if he fixes those things, he's actually an extremely strong linebacker, like astoundingly strong at times, linebacker. And he can get off blocks really well. He sheds blocks extremely well, which is what you want of a will linebacker. A middle linebacker, you're more than willing to let them take on blocks and close lanes than you are to have them shed blocks and attack lanes, which is what Jasper Brinkley did. That's what, Ray Maluga did for Cincinnati with Mike Zimmer. And they're less likely to want to go under blocks or anything like that to try and attack the ball carrier. They're just more likely to see blockers. The will linebacker has the luxury basically of having the 3 technique in front of him, and so the defensive tackle. And so what happens is you have in each gap you've got a lineman. So you've got a defensive end on one side and a defensive tackle right in front of you, and then you've got a gap that's open. Then you've got the nose tackle, and so the middle linebacker is supposed to take that open gap, and so the will linebacker theoretically has the freedom to attack the running back. Obviously, if there's a tight end or a fullback on the field, which, there always is, you sort of have to navigate that, and that, the middle linebacker takes on that fullback. And, the schemes change, but for the most part, the will linebacker is meant to be free and attack the running back. And the Sam and middle linebackers are supposed to take on the blocks. And so I don't want Eric Kendricks to take on as many blocks, even though I think he's better at it than people think. I want him to just be a heat-seeking missile and use his instincts to sift through trash. So I think he's better at will linebacker. I think that's the eventual plan for him. I think they're going to draft a middle linebacker next year after Chad retires and move Eric Kendricks to will linebacker, but keep him on the field for all 3 downs. So that's all fine for me. I think that he is a fantastic pick, and I think that he fits the Mike Zimmer defense really well. I just think that he doesn't fit at middle linebacker like a glove, but he fits at will linebacker really, really well.
Yeah, that's Kendricks was easily my favorite pick of the draft. Just looking at between him and the tight end we picked up, I really thought that Kendricks is going to be something special. Like I'm looking forward to the preseason just to see Kendricks toss people around.
Yeah, it'll be fun. I think a lot of people might be surprised by his ability to do exactly that, to toss people around. And if he fixes his technical issues in taking on blocks, that's going to happen. Even if he doesn't, I mean, he did that at UCLA against 260 pounds. He even did it against a 305 pound guard, where he took on a block poorly. He didn't set his feet, and he grabbed him basically at the collar, which is like the worst place. He lost leverage, and then he just threw them to the side. I mean, I think that's
actually Tabor toss. Yeah. So we agree Kendricks is going to be a great pick for the Vikes here. 3rd round, we picked up Danielle Hunter.
It's actually pronounced Danielle.
Danielle.
Yeah.
Apologies. I'm only good at Babatunde. I'm not good at Hunter. But we picked up Hunter, the defensive end from LSU. Picked him up round 3, pick 24. What are your thoughts?
I like him. He is, I think the word rare gets thrown around a lot. It gets kind of annoying for fans. but he is somewhat rare at the athletically at the defensive end position. He is long. He is so long. If you take a look at defensive line length, Danielle Hunter is one of the longest defensive linemen in the draft. So again, if you take a look at the wingspan thing, or if you take a look at the arm length thing, he has the longest arms. He's the second longest arms if you count Lyndon Trail as a defensive end. It depends. But he has the longest arms or second longest arms, depending on who you count, of the defensive ends. And then his wingspan is the third longest behind Frank Clark and Trey Flowers. Although, again, if you count players like Lyndon Trail, his wingspan is about as long as Lyndon Trail's. But if you count Corey Crawford, who could be a defensive tackle, then he has the fourth longest arms instead of the third longest. Either way, he's very long. He's 6'5", so he's pretty tall. He has room to add on weight if that's what the Vikings want him to do. He is physically astounding, I think. His combine tests are fantastic, etc., etc. He is an athlete, and that's unfortunately all he is right now. Otherwise, he'd be drafted a little bit higher. But I think he was a good pick. He's not as great as the Kendricks pick, but you only get the opportunities you get. And I think that he is, someone made this distinction on Twitter, I forgot his name. He's actually a Chicago Bears fan. But a good point is made is that he is extremely football smart, and I agree that he's very disciplined, patient, and he reads plays well, but he's also just technically exceedingly raw. And there's two reasons that he had such a low sack rate for the Tigers, the LSU Tigers. The first is that the scheme actually is not very conducive to a high sack rate. I mean, if you take a look at, I think it was Barkevius Mingo didn't have many more sacks than Hunter did in their final years. You don't tend to get double-digit sack artists from LSU with that scheme. Now, there's going to be a new defensive coordinator at LSU, so that could change. But the scheme that he worked out of was not very conducive to the type of production that creates, a lot of buzz. So that's the first reason. The second reason is he's just not very technically skilled. He has extremely poor hand-fighting technique. He's got I don't think he has any pass rush moves beyond. I think he just did stuff, which sometimes that
like just stared down the offensive lineman.
Well, no, he just moved his hand.
Just kind of shimmy.
That worked.
he's a vessel of shimmy. He can get through.
There's actually a moment where he does shimmy. I think it's against Wisconsin, where he does shimmy. And it is more effective than you would have expected, I guess, which is not to say it was effective.
It's not to say that it worked, but it definitely was interesting and made a highlight.
Yeah, the Wisconsin tape I think is interesting because the Facebook Vikings fan page, Kevin McMahon, who runs it, shared it with me as an argument that it was a bad pick, and I looked at this tape and I thought it was actually a really good argument for it being a good pick. And the reasons I think are pretty easy to find. I think that his agility was astounding on that tape. There's a moment where he rushes to the outside and he just sort of hops to the inside, and he would have gotten a sack, but he ended up getting double teamed. And he's within our arms. He's within a finger's reach of forcing a fumble anyway. But he showed a lot of agility on the field then. Wisconsin chose not to run it to him very often at all. They ran away from him, which when you consider the LSU defense, if you make a concerted choice not to run to one side of the field, I think that's very telling. Because it's already a strong defense all around. And so, clearly they think a lot, I think, of Danielle Hunter to run away from him. And they did it very often. And then on other occasions, they ran screens to his side, which is, if you recall, what they did to Clowney to tire him out. Not Wisconsin, but like a bunch of teams did that to Jadeveon Clowney. They tried to tire him out by running screens to his side and cut blocking him. And so I think that the way that other teams treated him on tape, I think, is also pretty evident. as to sort of the things they were scared of, because, again, he's not very technically proficient, and if he's not going to beat you, he's not going to beat you, but sometimes there's nothing you can do. I thought he bent the edge pretty well. They argue, I think the Vikings mentioned that he's not very fluid in his hips, and I think that's true-ish. I think that a lot of people confuse bending the edge for being agile, and I think that the combine test, the 3-cone, tests both things. It tests both agility and your ability to bend, because if you can bend, you get a faster 3-cone. It tests both things. They are distinct things because they involve balance and, range of motion and stuff like that. But I think that he can bend. I just don't think that he's very fluid when he flips his hips, which is fine because he's not going to be in coverage very often. He can make himself skinny, and he's just very athletically intriguing. And so he's a smart guy. He's very coachable. He's only played football for 5 years, which is why he's so raw. It also means that he has a very fast development curve because he ended up starting on the LSU defense despite only having, 4 years of football behind him. He started last year. In fact, I think he started the year before, too. So this says a lot about his ability to learn, that he ended up starting for 2 years. And so I am excited about the pick. I think it's a good pick. I don't think he's going to make an impact this year, although he should be pretty good on special teams in the same way Everson Griffin was.
And basically what the casual fan needs to hear out of that spiel is that defenses in college were making decisions on their plays based on the fact that he was on the field.
Offenses in college, but yes.
Yeah, offenses were having to decide to go away from him, which is definitely a positive quality if you ask me about somebody that you're drafting in the 3rd round.
Yeah, for sure.
Yep. So let's talk about offensive lineman from Pitt, T.J. Clemmings, round 4, pick 11.
So the concern I had about T.J. Clemmings from an on-field perspective as a first-round pick, and I understand why a lot of people thought he was a first-round pick, and they were probably right. But the concern I had about him was that he was very raw, kind of like Hunter. And so, a lot of people rejected him in the first round, despite that, because of his immense physical tools, which I'll talk about in a second. But his footwork was bad. It was inconsistent, but it got a lot better over time. And someone mentioned that you have to, for a lot of people, they'll watch film in a random order so as not to bias themselves. I think that's a really smart way to do it. But for some prospects, you want to watch their film chronologically, just to see if their development curve is very good. Like, I think that was, for example, a good way to evaluate Johnny Manziel's game, because he was such an unpolished passer as a freshman that when you watched him from freshman to sophomore year, or redshirt freshman, redshirt sophomore year, that his development in the game is something that you wanted to incorporate in your evaluation process. I think T.J. Clemmings is the same, but he gets a lot better over time. But I think he's still too raw to play early, and I think if you draft him in the first round, you're pressured, basically, internally within your sort of organization and by fans, which may matter to some, may not matter to some. I don't know how influential fans are to each individual team in that regard, but there's pressure, even not just in your organization, but like as a coach, there's a lot of pressure, because if the player that's playing at his position is not doing well, then you have to think, well, we've got this high value asset, we're paying a lot of money, we've invested a lot of time into him, we invested a first round pick into him, why not play him? That's basically, I think, what happened to Johnny Manziel. I think the Browns were not sold that he was developmentally ready. And every week they were basically like, yeah, I understand, like, McCown's not, God's gift to passing, but he's the best choice we have to win. We want to sit Johnny, to develop him. And then, I think they were internally pressured to start Johnny. Well, in injury, and then they started him. But they were internally pressured to start him, and I think that was a mistake. And that just happens even to sort of the best staffs. And I think that if you had T.J. Clemmings in the first round, you'd be forced to do that. But I think the reason that he's great in the 4th round is not just that pressure basically no longer exists, but he's a phenomenal steal, because I think that absent that pressure, I think that he probably is a first-round talent, even though you have a lot of troubles with a person who's not going to start year one, just because he's so astounding at being a tackle. A lot of people talk about him being a guard convert, I think, among the Vikings, just because they're so thirsty for having a left guard, and I don't think that's going to happen. at least with TJ Clemmings. I mean, he's only playing on the right side of the line. He's been playing right tackle mostly. He's played a little bit of right guard in rookie minicamp, but I think they evaluate him as a tackle. And the reasons for that are twofold. The first is that he's just a really stunning run blocker. When he wins basically the first step, and when he makes the right step, he's impossible. I don't think anyone beat him when he had the right footwork, and that's not really true for many offensive linemen. You take a look at Eric Flowers, who the Giants drafted 2 picks before the Vikings, stupidly in my opinion, and he is sort of this raw ball of athletic talent. But when he wins the step, or when he takes the right first 2 steps, or when he has the right footwork, he's not always winning, and that's fine. Generally speaking, offensive linemen don't always win, even if they do everything technically right. But TJ Clemmings, when he just does this one thing, which has nothing to do with his hands, his upper body, his technique in snapping his hips, etc., if he just had his footwork right on any particular play against any opponent in college, he won. And I think that that's the quality that had people have him in the first round. But he wasn't very consistent about winning those first steps. And so sometimes he was late off the snap, sometimes he just took the wrong step, sometimes he needed to take an extra step in order to get moving, which is a problem. But when he was on, he was basically unbeatable. And it's very hard to find that. His kick slide was smoother than you'd expect someone who's only played offensive tackle for 2 years, which again, kind of like Hunter, he hasn't played football for very long. He's played offensive line for even less time. He switched from defensive end actually to offensive tackle, and he said he was more aggressive as an offensive tackle than he was as a defensive end, which is interesting because it's a protection job more than anything else. But yeah,
it's definitely a weird thing to say considering the nature of what you're doing at defensive end.
Right, exactly. Right, you're very rarely not being aggressive as a defensive end, but whatever worked for Clemmings worked for him because he turned from a sort of a rotational defensive end into a standout prospect offensive tackle. And he's got a lot of strength. You can obviously see that throughout his entire body. He has core strength, which is really important, which is why Tyrus Thompson, for example, may not be a great guard because he's got a lot of strength, but he doesn't have a lot of core strength. He has a lot of upper body strength, of course. He's got a bunch of explosion in his legs. He's got really good hip snap. All of that, all of those things that relate to strength, he's got it, which is great. I think that his movement skills are pretty good when he's got footwork. When he doesn't, they're abysmal, and he'll whiff blocks, and linebackers will get by him, and it's not good. But he just has some just dominating film, and so I think that if the Vikings are correct in extending Jeff Davidson and trusting him as the developer of the offensive line, which again, I mean, he developed Brandon Fusco, and Phil Lodeholt has done better under him than any other offensive line coach that he's had, including the ones he had in Oklahoma. And John Sullivan did better under Davidson than he did anywhere else. It's just sort of the development of Matt Khalil that makes people think Davidson's not very good, which fair, but you got to look at the whole picture. If the Vikings are correct in trusting him, and his quality as an offensive line coach, and he was pursued by 3 teams, including the Patriots, before the Vikings sort of signed up that contract. Then I think Clemmings is a pretty phenomenal pick. You have to worry about the stress fracture in his foot, which is the reason that he dropped. It sounded like Spielman overrode the objections of Sugarman, so that should perk up your ears, because I think Sugarman didn't want the Vikings to, and this is speculation based off of sort of a half sentence of a press conference, but I think Sugarman didn't want the Vikings to draft Clemmings based on the medicals. And I think that they thought it was a pretty significant deal. But again, he didn't miss any time. Clemmings has no pain in either of his feet. It's supposed to be a stress fracture in his right foot. Clemmings sometimes even forgets which foot it was that was supposed to make him fall. He was even surprised, so he was informed of this issue at the combine when they found it. It was evidently an old injury, but he was surprised that it was significant enough for teams to make him fall because he didn't even feel bothered by it, much less miss time because of it. And so at the end of the second round is when he sort of realized, oh, wow, I guess I'm falling because of this. And at the end of the third round, it sort of struck home, right, because no team drafted him. And he was like, that's nuts, right? That would drop me because it's not been an issue in my group. But, you can't control it. Stuff happens, and now he's on a team. So I think that's an A-plus pick along with the Kendricks pick. And those two, I think, are my favorite picks of the draft because he can be like Tyron Smith good. He's really good.
Well, in the lead up to the draft, when they were talking about T.J. Clemmings, one of the blogs that I had read about why not to grab Clemmings was more of a like home run hitter situation. Like he could hit it out of the park, but there wasn't enough to kind of justify keeping him around for anything else. Like when he was on, but if he was, those felt like few and far between.
I think that's a really good point about offensive line play. It's the reason that Darrell Williams was drafted ahead of his teammate Tyrus Thompson, who the Vikings drafted. Even though Tyrus Thompson had better highlights, had better physical measurables, had better everything from an athletic standpoint and from a prototype standpoint, from basically an everything standpoint, except Darrell Williams was consistent. He was one of the most consistent offensive linemen in the draft, actually. And Tyrus Thompson wasn't. And there are rumors that Tyrus Thompson was supposed to be lazy and all that, and that's fine. But there's a really strong movement among, I think, not just draft minds, but like football thinkers, like people like Chase Stewart at Football Perspective, and I think Sigmund Bloom at Football Guys. I think Aaron Schatz at Football Outsiders. I think all of them, or people like them, maybe not necessarily them, all of them have been very strong advocates of the idea of finding basically your Ichiro Suzuki's, right? Your singles hitters at offensive line, and making sure that they're consistent even if they're not dominating, because that is better than a guy who, like you said, hits home runs and then also strikes out a lot. You're Jim Tomes. And I think that's good, and I think that's true. I don't think that that's as true of Clemmings when you project him outward as it will be of, say, Tyrus Thompson when you project him forward in terms of like learning new skills and picking up things and what have you. But I think that's a reason that Clemmings would not be picked above someone like Brandon Sheriff, who I guess his pronunciation has changed again. So at the Combine, he told people he wanted his name to be pronounced Sheriff. And then recently, the team that drafted him, the Redskins, released a press statement saying it's now pronounced Scherf, which is how people have been mostly pronouncing it anyway. As an aside. But, that's one of the reasons that you'd have Scherf ahead of Clemmings or Eric Flowers or whoever, because Scherf was very consistent. Same with La'el Collins, who was very consistent. And Clemmings was a home run hitter. Eric Flowers was a potential home run hitter. Again, not really sure why he was picked ninth. And that's, you would want to draft maybe a lower pick in an offensive lineman who is very unlikely to let a sack happen on a particular play, but it's also unlikely to pancake someone. I think that's a very good way to think about offensive linemen. I don't think that T.J. Clemmings is doomed to be sort of a highlight reel tackle versus a consistent tackle.
Next, we get to move on to the next pick, and this was a good one. Michael Pruitt, the tight end from Southern Illinois, pick 7 out of the round 5, and this was Norv Turner's baby. This was the one that Norv Turner wanted badly.
Yeah, I guess he pounded the table for him, right?
The Vikings.com article that had come out listed names like Jordan Cameron in Cleveland and Antonio Gates in San Diego as comparable guys. Like that's pretty high praise.
It is. I think they just chose people that Norv Turner's worked with. I don't know if those are
like that.
Yeah, I mean it's Vikings.
Oh, and get this, in the article it said that he played basketball. Is there a tight end out there that didn't play basketball at some point?
Yeah, I'm going to ask, because, what if?
I feel like that's something for the listeners. If you come across a tight end that starts in the NFL that didn't play basketball at some point, send his name to us. We'll do the research on it, and we'll send you a hat.
Do we have hats?
We can get hats again.
Again? When do we have hats? Oh, you gave away hats. That's true.
Yeah. There's a couple of Norse code signed hats floating out into the ether. But, yeah, so, Pruitt, thoughts on the new tight end?
Well, okay, so first with these comparisons, Antonio Gates and Michael Pruitt are both above 6'4". So I think that's important. Michael Pruitt's like 6'2", kind of like A.C. Leonard. A lot of people are like, oh, A.C. Leonard didn't work out, and they tried this experiment last year. There's like two issues with that. First, A.C. Leonard was a two-dimensional athlete instead of a multi-dimensional athlete, and also he was a head case, evidently, who never got on the field for the Vikings in training camp because like constant headaches, which I guess nobody on staff believed. Again, speculation, not reporting. And he was, kicked off of the Florida team, and I think he was at Middle Tennessee or one of those Tennessee schools that's not the University of Tennessee, like maybe Tennessee State. And he was rumored to have like off-field issues there. He was kind of goofy in training camp. There's some stories that are rumors that don't paint him in a good light. Those things are different than Michael Pruitt. Like I think that like the reason A.C. Leonard didn't work out has nothing to do with sort of the physical package that A.C. Leonard is, and more to do with the issues that come with being A.C. Leonard and having him on your team. And so I think that that's not necessarily a fair comparison. Although athletically they're a little bit more similar because of that height issue. But Pruitt I like because like you said, North Turner, he wasn't just his baby. I mean, he pounded the table for him. It was very important to him that they get Pruitt, because, he's very versatile, right? So he's 6'2", 250 pounds, which is pretty dense for a tight end at 6'2". And I think that he's got a lot of skill. He's, a surprising-ish pick because I didn't know if the Vikings were going to pick him because, he's relatively old for a Vikings pick. They don't tend to pick people older than 23. He is 23. But yeah, whatever. He was one of the two tight ends out of like the 94 or so that I have data for that have tested at the Pro Day and the Combine this year. Two tight ends that ran faster than a 4.6 40, which I think is pretty telling. He had a phenomenal vertical jump, 38 inches. He had very good short shuttle and three cone times for his weight. Not astounding, but very good. 4.37 and 7.25 respectively. He has good explosion numbers, good strength, and good overall measurables. Beyond that, what he provides, I think, is a lot different than any of what the current tight ends on the roster provide. I think Kyle Rudolph, unless his weight loss plus his return from injury speed up his game, and again, Kyle Rudolph has always been slow for the Vikings. He was way too heavy when they were playing under Bill Musgrave because they wanted him closer to 270, 280, which we didn't find out until after North Turner came. I think he dropped to like 250-some pounds under North Turner, maybe like 260, or I think 258 was the specific number. Either way, he dropped a significant amount of weight, and the hope was that he would be faster as a result of it, and we didn't get to see enough of him on field to see if that was the case because he got injured. And in that respect, he isn't the same as Pruitt, who's very fast. And so what Rudolph provides, I think, is more of a red zone threat or sort of a move the chains that are down type possession type tight end. And he doesn't do as much stuff. I think Chase Ford is an all-around tight end. He's just your box standard tight end who's pretty good. Probably better than most third-string tight ends. I think Rhett Ellison is more of an H-back, fullback who blocks, and I think that Michael Pruitt is sort of the inverse of that, if you will. And by that, I mean that Pruitt is an H-back who catches versus an H-back who blocks, whereas Rhett Ellison is an H-back who blocks as opposed to one that catches. And they're sort of two sides of the same coin in terms of sort of their adaptability and flexibility. I also like the pick. It is surprising in general just because, a lot of people didn't think about tight end as a need. I think that it makes sense to think of tight end as a need just because, Rudolph's injured all the time and Ellison doesn't perform a lot of traditional tight end duties within the context of a Norv Turner offense, etc. But he's really good after the catch. We saw a bunch of tight end screens last year that were really infuriating, but they did relieve a lot of the pressure on the offensive line. But they didn't do much because Kyle Rudolph caught the ball and didn't advance it very far, or Rhett Ellison got the ball and didn't advance it very far. So Pruitt is very good after the catch. He's not just fast; he's fluid. He's got very good after catch vision, which is important. And so he's the kind of guy that can make something of tight end screens and turn them into not just a way to relieve the pass rush, but to turn them into pretty good gains. They even turn them into first downs. That's important. He's a very good route runner from a precision sort of perspective. I think that he has to learn a little bit more in terms of option routes. He probably has to learn a little bit more in terms of finding the best spot in zones and stuff like that. But he's got very good reflexes. He's got very good body control. He catches the ball well. He attacks the ball really well. He's just got really great hands. He's the conference record holder. Again, SIU, so not a huge deal, but conference record holder in career catches, yards, and touchdowns for a tight end. So he's very productive there. He lined up in line. He lined up in the slot. Vikings are planning on using him not just there, but on the outside as a receiver and sort of as a fullback at times. And he's going to have to block a lot better to do that. But I think that he's sort of your Swiss Army knife. If it wasn't so, brutal to make comparisons to Aaron Hernandez, that could be the role that he plays with less running the ball.
Aaron Hernandez with less attempted or completed murders?
Yeah, less alleged attempted or completed murders. Which
is all we could really ask for. That, and if he's not going to be a blocking tight end, he needs to be useful in other respects. So right. It would be nice to have him catch and have a tight end that stays healthy.
Yeah, that'd be cool. I would enjoy that.
That would be a change.
Yeah, I think people call them F tight ends, not H-backs, but F. I don't know. There's a bunch of different names for these joker tight ends that do a bunch of stuff. But yeah, you would be Shane Vereen, Aaron Hernandez type role with less running the ball, but I wouldn't be surprised if they ended up running the ball.
And some were saying that this is almost an attempt at a Patriots-style offense with three tight ends.
I mean, if it is, they have the personnel to do it. I would say that calling it that would not. I think it would do Norv Turner an injustice because I think he's always wanted these body types on his team. But who knows? I mean, the league's a copycat league, so it's not like Norv Turner is above taking successful concepts from other teams and using them. But yeah, I would not be surprised to see a three tight end set on the field that is surprisingly fast and mobile.
Next up, let's kind of breeze through the next couple here. Stephon Diggs, the wide receiver out of Maryland, was picked 3 after that. Was a round 5, pick 10.
Yeah, Diggs has an interesting career. He's had issues with injury, but for the most part, think of him as a guy who is either in the long term going to replace Cordero Patterson, or more likely, in my opinion, is a guy who is designed to replicate Cordero Patterson's abilities so that if there's an injury at that position, or if he's just taking too many snaps, you can put in another person without having to change your offense at all, which is hugely important. I mean, I think the Vikings have had that problem sort of dramatically explained to them when they had to, play Joe Webb instead of Christian Ponder. And even to a smaller problem when they benched Cordero Patterson, they didn't have as full a playbook as they wanted. So Stephon Diggs, very Cordero Patterson-like, Not as freaky of an athlete, and slightly better as a route runner. And so you can take it or leave it. Also a punt returner, unlike Patterson, who's only a kick returner. So there's those things.
A better route runner than Patterson is. I almost think I'm a better route runner than Patterson.
You might be.
It's entirely possible. I can follow some dots.
But yeah, and he's a little bit more physical than Patterson too, except when blocking. So with the ball in his hands, he's a little bit more physical. Although Patterson is actually surprisingly physical with the ball in his hands. He just doesn't seem like it because he's not physical without the ball in his hands. Anyway, I think that he represents that role, the gadget type role, and he can do all of those things. And the Vikings have already started running the ball with him in minicamp, so I think that they've clearly envisioned a very similar role for him.
Well, let's go on to our seventh pick, which was Tyrus Thompson. We talked briefly about him, offensive lineman from the Oklahoma Sooners, round 6, pick 9.
Yeah, so the Sooners know how to find these super long, super big tackles. I mean, it's not just Phil Loadholt, Darrell Williams, or Tyrus Thompson, but it's like been a history of them.
Their recruiting class is always just this giant class of Holsteins, just giant.
Yeah, just behemoths. Thompson is another one of those. Loadholt was a second-round pick. I think Thompson is as good when he's on as a second-round pick, but man, so his highlights are great. His highlights are like almost TJ Clemming good, basically. His highlights are among the best in the class. His lowlights are really bad. They're among the worst in the class for the draftable tackles. So he's really inconsistent. He's on-off. A lot of people say that that's because he's lazy. I don't know. He has like these rumors of off-field concerns, and then I don't know how much you can gather from a character perspective from like brief conversations, but I've had two with him. One was a press conference call basically with a bunch of other reporters. The other one was at rookie minicamp, and he just does not strike me as that at all. And maybe. Yeah, I think that you should not necessarily read too much into brief conversations with people, and I think a lot of people tend to do that, especially in the draft when they interview a prospect, and they're like, well, he's actually a great character because he talked to me, and he's very articulate, and that means he's not lazy, which is not true. But it is surprising after talking to him to see all that, not just because he has this military family background, which might not be relevant, right, because not every military brat ends up being a hard worker. But he has a kid, and I confirmed this with someone else at Oklahoma. He didn't actually party with the rest of the team. He went home to take care of his wife and kids. He has 2 kids. I don't know. He doesn't seem like the guy that you would peg as lazy. I think actually he's just an inconsistent player, and that's who he is. I think that he has second-round talent, and he dropped in the draft because of that inconsistency and rumors of him being lazy. I don't think he's necessarily lazy, but again, I didn't investigate that fact. I just talked to him. Also, his birthday is a day after mine, I think.
So he's your star sign, so that means he's lazy.
That's a pretty good interpretation, I think.
Yeah, probably. Moving on. BJ Dubois?
Dubose.
Yeah. See, I always want to add some sort of flair to it, and it's just not worth it. Offensive lineman out of Louisville, round 6, pick 17, just a couple after Tyrus.
I was not enchanted by this pick. It's not like an awful pick. It's not like,
to put it mildly,
right? I mean, it's not like when Dallas picked Chaz Green. So I mean, it's not by any means the worst pick in the round or the worst pick in the draft or anything like that. But I think it's the least good pick the Vikings made.
The one that has the most to show you.
The one that has, yes, the most to show me, the most to prove. I think Dubose is neither a good defensive end or defensive tackle. He played all those positions at Louisville. He has a good, I guess it's pronounced Dubose. Look at that, I found a pronunciation guide. He has a good, build, basically, for an athlete. I don't know if that his build matches what you'd want a defensive tackle or a defensive end to be. I think he has to gain weight to be a defensive tackle. I think he has to lose a little bit of weight to be a defensive end. Either way, he's not an overly long athlete. He's not an overly explosive athlete. He's got good upper body strength, but I think his lower body strength is an issue. I think his core strength is an issue. He's disciplined and he's active and he's a high effort athlete. And those are important, but obviously when you lead with those things, it doesn't say a lot about him, right? Like when you lead with, well, he's got a lot of effort, then I think that sort of tells you everything else. I think that he was picked because he's versatile and he's a jack of all trades. He's not good at any of those things, but it is the 6th round. And so, I'm not overly upset with it. I just think that there were a lot of really great picks the Vikings could have made there. And, they didn't. They picked him. He's the opposite off the field, that Tyrus Thompson is rumored to be, right? He's a very hard worker, incredibly hard worker, evidently. And he loves, like the weight room, which is like a thing. But he's just like, he's not flexible. He's not super powerful. He doesn't win off the snap as much. He has been suspended for bad practice reps, so it's not like him being a good worker necessarily always worked out for him. And he didn't have a lot of production, and so great. I mean, he backs up like 4 different positions for the Vikings, so I think that may be why they picked him.
It's less about the at that point. It's much less about what he's doing at the one position, more just, well, he fills a lot of holes.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and I think that's it. And I think that's sort of a fine approach. But I think the Vikings have enough defensive ends at this point that you don't have to look for depth there, and I think they have enough defensive tackles that you don't have to look for depth there. So, meh.
Right. Pick 9 with Austin Shepard out of Alabama, offensive lineman, round 7, pick 11. Not a stunning pick or anything like that, but I'm not like as unimpressed by it, I guess, as I was by the DeBose pick. Seventh round picks are more just kind of shots in the dark anyway.
Right. And not every one of those shots in the dark needs to necessarily be an overly athletic person, because then you're basically still overdrafting and ignoring some people who've showed a lot of skill that are not necessarily related to testing numbers. And I think that this is sort of who Austin Shepard is. He's very functional, basically. He has good enough athleticism when he moves side to side. He's got good enough agility. He's got decent foot quickness. He's extremely smart. He's extremely aware. He's very instinctive. He's another one of those high character players. He likes to finish. All of those things, right, are true. I think he's got good hands. He's got good technique. He's got good balance, and all that, and he doesn't necessarily work well in space. I think that despite sort of his quick feet, he doesn't get to the edge as quickly as he should to deal with speed rushers. So he's a guard, right? He played tackle for Alabama, but he's a guard in the NFL, and he doesn't have, the most power for a guard. It's about average, and if you've got a guy who is average at a lot of things athletically, but very smart, very aware, very instinctive, that plays with good technique, I think you've got potentially an extremely good backup, if not just a very good camp body to have. Again, 7th round, if not just a good camp body to have. I am not unexcited by the pick, but I'm also not excited by the pick, if you know what I mean. I'm like, I have warm fuzzies about it, but I'm not like promoting it.
And last but not least, Edmund Robinson, linebacker out of Newberry, round 7, pick 15.
Great pick. I love that pick. Oh, my God. This is a guy that I thought should have gone in the 3rd round. I think that it would have been okay for a team to take him in the 2nd round, but there's so much talent in this draft that it probably wasn't going to happen. And I wouldn't have been surprised. I think that where I pegged him to be was the 4th round. But he's 7th round, so, TJ Clemmings, you got a 1st round athlete in the 4th round. Edmund Robinson, you got a 4th round athlete in the 7th round. I know some draft sites were not very high on him. I know Dane Brugler wasn't very high on him. But I liked him. I thought he looked good in the East-West game. and I thought that he was underrated because of what he was asked to do at Newberry. He also, by the way, looked very good in camp, covering tight ends. So he's a super long dude at linebacker. He's, I think he's like 246, 245, something like that. Ran a 4.61 just as fast as Eric Kendricks, but Kendricks did it at 232, right? So I think he's very, very fast for his size. I think he's very explosive. His broad jump was 121 inches. His vertical jump was 37. I think his agility numbers were not great, but I thought they were good. Maybe they're not. I don't remember those because I remember the good ones, but I don't remember the average or poor ones for this guy. But he was asked to cover the slot a lot. He was asked to cover slot receivers and tight ends a lot. And so he didn't rack up a ton of production at Newberry, but he's considered the defensive MVP, despite the fact that he never led the team in tackles and he never led the team in tackles for loss. What goes missing in that is that he was, someone was talking about Miles Jack the other day in my Twitter feed, and they called him a defensive weapon, right? Like you remember, sort of the Jaguars called Denard Robinson an offensive weapon instead of giving him a position that we're familiar with. Sort of like Percy Harvin and Darren Sproles or Cordero Patterson or Tavon Austin. Miles Jack was a defensive weapon because he was basically as good as a cornerback and even covered outside players at 240-some pounds. Edmund Robinson is not that different from that. He did it in Division II. I don't think he's going to do that in the NFL. I don't think he's going to cover wide receivers or anything crazy like that. But I think that because he was asked to do everything there, he played safety, he played slot cornerback, he played defensive end, he played linebacker, he played everything. He's listed as a linebacker, but he played everything. And that's why his production isn't very good. But he was the defensive MVP for them for 2 years running. And he's a very violent hitter. He wraps up well. I think he's got pretty good instincts. A lot of people say that his instincts aren't great. I think that his anticipation isn't necessarily great, but I think his instincts are good. I think that he just doesn't have a lot of experience reading NFL offenses, so he doesn't necessarily know what the quarterback is going to do. But I think that once he learns that, he's going to be good. I think that he's a better pick than some of these other seventh-round linebackers that the Vikings have picked, like Audie Cole, who has been an astounding seventh-round pick. I've been wrong on him at every turn. But I think that Robinson is even better than that. And I think that he brings a lot to the table. And I think that he's a fantastic backup at Sam linebacker. And I think that on another team, if he had enough time, he could eventually start. I think he'll be a special teams maven because he's astoundingly fast for his size. And I think he's relatively instinctive. I mean, he has to learn about play fakes and play action, and he has to learn about some forms of zone coverage and reading offenses, but he's instinctive. He's a good hitter, and he's got good footwork, and he's fast, and he's light on his feet, so I like him.
So the question we kept getting this week and last week was who starts the season, and do you feel like anybody is on the hot seat for training camp?
Yeah, someone asked me that the other day, and I didn't really know what they meant in terms of hot seat because some people interpreted that question to mean people who were on the 53 last year that are not going to be on the 53 this year, and other people interpreted that to mean starters who are not going to start anymore. So I'll say this, I think Adam Thielen's at risk unless Norv Turner decides to carry 6 wide receivers, in which case he's a clear 6th in my mind, to Stephon Diggs and the other 4. And I think that is fair because I don't think the Vikings are going to enter this season with 2 fullbacks on the roster like they did last year. In fact, they even entered last year with 6 receivers on the roster before they ended up cutting ties with Rodney Smith. So I think that that's a possibility. I think that we're going to lose some of these linebackers that we've learned to like Michael Motti, who I love and I wish could have competed for a starting position. It's not like the Vikings are not as high on him as Twitter or a lot of other Vikings fans are. So I'm worried about him. I think he's sort of on the hot seat in terms of making the roster. I think Sherrills has some punt return competition with Stephon Diggs. The reason I think that Diggs is more likely to take the punt return spot than Thielen was, even though Thielen had a very good preseason at it, is because Diggs, from what little I saw at minicamp, in terms of returning punts, has one of the rare things that Marcus Sherrills has, which is that he doesn't have to take any time to secure the punt before he moves upfield. He just boom, he moves. And he tracks the ball really well. I don't think he put the ball on the ground in those punt return drills. And it's just really hard to do all those things. And Sherrills had it, and Thielen didn't, even though he had a good preseason. But statistically, and even if you sort of take a look at some of the things that he did well as a punt returner, and so I think that Sherrills, you have to worry about him because the cornerback depth chart is going to get really crowded. I think that you have to worry about Robert Blanton's place on the team, and maybe Andrew Sendejo's. I think they like Sendejo more than Blanton. And if that's true, and I think they like Anton Exum more than Sendejo, and then you have to worry, they brought in Taylor Mays. So I think that one of those two, Blanton or Sendejo, are going to get lost in the shuffle, which means they could go from starter last year to on another team next year, or maybe not even in the league anymore. So those are people that I'd watch out for. I think at linebacker, I think we're not going to see Gerald Hodges or Audie Cole starting, which is a shame. I'd rather have one of them start over Chad Greenway, but it sounds like he's going to start. But he's at risk too. I think that it would be unfair to say that his position is not, going to be evaluated pretty heavily. So those are the players I'd watch out for. I think that at left guard, I think you're going to find a lot of competition. Obviously, I think that Yankee's going to end up winning that spot despite the contract they gave Berger. Or Berger, depends on how you pronounce it. I've seen two different pronunciation guys from the Vikings on his name. Austin Wentworth's already gone. Otherwise, I would have identified him potentially. And then I think Michael Harris has competition, but who knows? So those are the players I'd watch out for. Oh, and I think Mike Kafka is going to lose his job to Taylor Heineke, but who cares about your third string quarterback?
The name that I got out of that was Chad Greenway, and if you missed it, it's been a couple of weeks since we had a show, but if you missed it, Chad and Arif had a very special and touching moment on Twitter. That might be that was the end of the internet. Like, if you guys could have been in the chat little thing that Dusty Arif and I had when that happened, it was just the internet was done. That was it. How did it feel to get that sort of response?
I could not breathe. I was laughing so hard. That was such a phenomenal moment. I think some people were like, "Oh, Arif got burned" or whatever. No, it was just awesome. I don't really. I mean, maybe I did. I don't care. That was awesome. That was so fun. I was really happy that we had that interaction. I think it also proves what I've been saying about him from a character perspective. He's just awesome, right? He's awesome. He takes it all in stride. When I was talking about him at training camp, I was like, "Hey, Chad, do you have a minute to talk?" And he was like, "Oh, hey, Arif, why do you hate me?" He takes everything, really well. And I love the guy. Obviously, what I think about him as a football player, people already know, but I love him, and it was great that I was his second tweet ever. Hilarious. Just hilarious.
So if you want to convince Chad Greenway that he should come on to our podcast, you can now tweet to Chad at Chad Greenway 52. So we can start that up, and maybe we can get Chad on mid-season and talk about why he is a pretty terrible football player.
I'm sure he would love to have that conversation.
That's easily my favorite Twitter interaction of the year was watching that go down, and just the entire internet just stopped for a second and just watched.
Yeah, that was great. I think to me that's number one, and then number two is Cardale Jones's Twitter feud with Joakim Noah, which seems like pretty one-sided, but who cares? It's awesome. That's it. It's amazing. I love it.
So that was pretty awesome. So while we've been away, rookie training camp has also started. Is there anything notable out of training camp?
I mean, there's never anything notable, I think, about rookie mini camp. But people want sort of reviews on how people did. So this is interesting. I saw a Paul Allen note that said basically the same thing about Trey Waynes that I said about minicamp, which is that I didn't think minicamp was good, except Paul Allen can't say no one was good, right? Paul Allen and Mike Wobschall can't say, I thought this player played poorly, especially a first-round pick. But I think Allen basically couched it, right, by saying, oh, Waynes is learning a lot. He's learning a lot of new techniques. And, Stephon Diggs burned him like once, which is true. He burned him really badly once. But he also beat him a couple of times that weren't like bad burns. And I think Waynes lost a guy in transition. I would not worry about that, by the way. Waynes lost a guy in transition because he thought a safety would pick up a dude, and it was actually his responsibility. I would not worry about that because it's an assignment thing and not a thing that I was worried about on his film or anything like that. But he didn't have a very good minicamp. I thought Stephon Diggs had a phenomenal minicamp. I thought Michael Pruitt had a pretty good minicamp. I can't tell you how offensive or defensive linemen did because there's no pads. I don't know. I mean, they're just rookies playing against tryout players that are playing the first football that they've had since the end of the college season in a completely new system with completely new coaches. So all the flaws are irrelevant. All the strengths may not matter. And so nothing super notable. I think the roles that people are asked to play are maybe more notable. Kendricks played middle linebacker. That seems to be the plan for him. Hunter played right end, the Everson Griffin spot. I think B.J. DuBose played the left end spot, which is going to be Scott Crichton's spot, which is Brian Robinson's spot. Isom Fashion is a guard, which no one has reported on. He's a guard now. He's a defensive tackle last year. He's a guard. That's like true, and no one's mentioned that. There's nothing else. I like Leon Mackey. He's a great guy. I got a story on him soon. I've been lazy about transcribing it, but he has a phenomenal story. And he's a defensive end from the Arizona Rattlers and also Texas Tech and Hargrove Military Academy. But yeah, he's fun. So I'll get a story on him soon. But nothing super notable, I think, from rookie camp that we didn't already know. Besides performance stuff, which I don't think is all that important.
Yeah. Well, I think that since we've done so much about the draft, that we're just going to have ourselves a two-parter. So we're going to end this week. Next episode, which should happen the next day, should be coming out on Friday. We're going to go over Matt Khalil and his double knee surgery, what we know, what we don't know, should we care, does this justify his performance last year? Probably not, but we'll also go into the Tom Brady as a ball deflator and our giant Twitter mailbag that should definitely have a lot of good information in it for you. So,
and the 2016 mock draft roundup.
And the 2016 mock draft roundup. I totally forgot about that thing I didn't want to remember. Awesome. So, on behalf of Arif, my name is James. You can find us at NorseCodeDN or at NorseCodePodcast.com. Our formula is this. You should have traded to Cleveland. See you tomorrow.
Norse Code is the official podcast of the Daily Norseman SB Nation blog and is produced with cooperation from Pompous Jerk Productions. Pompous Jerk Productions. Attitude with attitude. The opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of their contributors and do not reflect official positions of the Minnesota Vikings, SB Nation, the Daily Norseman staff, or PJP. No information in this podcast should be construed as gambling advice. Please obey all local gaming laws.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.